So the UFC returns to São Paulo, Brazil for the first time since the start of the pandemic later this year in November. November 4th is the scheduled date, and they've already got three, I think four fights that are officially announced for that card. But what I wanted to do was to just fill out that card, round it out, and just add a bunch of really fun matchups and fighters that I want to see on that Brazil card, and just make that an amazing card that's just going to be absolutely must watch and just cannot fail to deliver. Um, so this is the card. I'm gonna just go through it. I'm gonna go through the whole card. I've got a stacked main card, stacked prelims, and just a really fun card to go over. But we're gonna start off with the main card and the main event, which is already official, but I'm just gonna talk about it anyway for a little bit. We've got Jalton Almeida versus Curtis Blades. This one's been officially made for a month or two now. Really good fight in the heavyweight division. Um, really important as well in determining maybe who could be a future title challenger. If Dalton Almeida wins this, you could definitely be seeing him fight for the belt soon, maybe after Aspinall and Pavlovich fight, or maybe after Jones beats Stipe and retires. You could see Almeida fight for a vacant title. But this is a main event. It's already been made, but I just wanted to mention it a little bit. But a really good fight, and it's going to be a real grappling test here. And you've got a few other fights on this card which are also going to be some really competitive fights in the grappling. Um, but let's move on to the first fight that I've actually made here. We've got the co-main event. It's Gilbert Burns against Sean Brady. So I'm just going to talk about this. So Gilbert Burns obviously had that bad injury against Bilal Muhammad. He said he would probably be out till around the end of the year, November when he comes back. In November, he did say he would not be opposed to returning on the Brazil card. Obviously, he fought there earlier in the year when he submitted Neil Magny. Um, but he needs to come back and he needs a good opponent to get a win or to just test himself back. And I don't want to see this guy against like a Shavkat Rakhmonov or like a loser of Colby versus Leon or something like that, or like a Jack Della Maddalena or an Ian Gary. I don't want to see this guy against a really dangerous fighter that could just knock him out, or that like if he's not at 100%, he'll have absolutely no chance. So I think what you do here is you test him, you test the grappling a little bit, you just get him back in there with someone who probably doesn't deserve this kind of jump up the rankings, but it's a winnable fight for Burns. And obviously, if you're thinking about it in the terms of getting a guy on that Brazil card, getting a Brazilian a win, so Sean Brady is that guy. I think he's coming off the loss to Bilal. Look, it would have been better if they could have got another fight for Brady in the meantime, like if he could be coming off a win, getting this opponent. But I think this would be a really fun fight in the grappling, in the scrambles. Would really make Sean Brady know. If he could somehow win this fight, I would definitely pick Gilbert Burns. But if Sean Brady won this fight or looked good in the grappling, that would really show that he's still in that top 10 level. Because right now he does need to kind of rebound and prove that he's still a top contender after that loss to Bilal. So this would be a really good fight. I think Burns would piece him up on the feet, in my opinion. But we did just see Burns obviously lose to Bilal. There was an injury involved, but you never know. Burns has never been the most technical, quick, straight punching kind of guy, but he also is very powerful, and I do think he would beat Sean Brady. But I think this would be a sick fight to add as the co-main event of that card. And if Burns wins, get the Brazilians happy. But we're going to move on to the next fight on the card, the feature fight, or the third fight on the main card. It's Mateus Nicolau versus Alex Perez. I think this is a pretty easy matchup to make. It's number 6 versus number 7 in the flyweight rankings. Both of these guys coming off losses, so get one of them back on the win streak and try and get them back into that top 5 to see if they're still at that top caliber. Um, and we got Mateus Nicolau, obviously. He was on a bit of a streak. He KO'd Matt Schnell. But then he fought Brandon Royval and just got done by the sort of explosiveness and the wildness of Brandon Royval. So I think this would be a good matchup to get him back in there. Alex Perez, not the most skilled guy. He's kind of lost to a lot of the guys at flyweight. In all seriousness, probably, or in honesty, probably doesn't deserve anyone ranked above him. But they're right next to each other in the rankings. We've got a Brazilian in Nicolau, and if I think he would get a win here as well. So you want to be. Sometimes what you do when you're fighting, like when you're doing these cards in countries that you don't go to super often, or that have some really dedicated fans, is you kind of have to give some of the guys a bit of favorable matchups to make sure they're happy. Like we saw on that Brazil card in January, mostly Brazilians won, but the ones that didn't, the crowd was absolutely filthy. So I'm not saying you just give all the Brazilians just easy fights, but you do give them winnable matchups and matchups that if they do win, you can get those fans happy. So I think Mateus Nicolau versus Alex Perez, I think it would be a really fun fight all round. Fun on the feet, fun on the ground. I think Mateus Nicolau would win. I think he's a bit more patient and just picks the right shots. Alex Perez also has shown a bit of a weakness in the grappling if you kind of just attack him. But I think this would just be a really fun fight. It's top level flyweight, so it's always going to be fun. And yeah, but moving on, Diego Lopez versus Daniel Pineda. Diego Lopez just won his last fight against Gavin Tucker in Nashville just over the weekend. And he wants his next fight to be on the Brazil card. He said he actually just tweeted earlier today. He said that he's had someone turn him down. So I don't know who would have turned him down. I'm not surprised that anyone turned him down. To be honest, he's an absolute menace on the ground. But I think Daniel Pineda is a guy that maybe he turned him down, but if Daniel Pineda's, I think he's a guy that would accept anyone. He's coming off a tough loss. I believe it was to Alex Caceres on the Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi card, but it was a scrap. He had Alex Caceres in an armbar, so he's got some legit grappling. And it would be a good test, close, just outside the rankings, very close to the top 15 of the featherweight rankings. Would be a good test to see if Diego Lopez is at that level. I think he is, and if he wins this one, it's a ranked opponent. But he wants to be on the Brazil card. I say 100%. Um, he's got a bit of a name behind him now. He's got some fan support as well. um, and yeah, I think this will be a good fight, fun scrap. I think Pineda would provide some resistance on the ground. I do believe he would. But I do think Thiago Lopez is could definitely win this fight because I think he's legit top 10 caliber. But anyway, moving on, the next fight, Elvis Brenner versus Thiago Moises. I think this is a really fun fight. Both Brazilians, obviously, so either way, they're gonna get a winner. The Brazilian fans, you can't fucking whinge about one of you guys losing if both of the fighters are Brazilian. But Elvis Brenner coming off a really impressive comeback win over Guram Kutateladze. Thiago Moises, I believe he might have a fight book, or he pulled out of a fight with Bernard Saint Denis for Paris. I think if he pulled out of that fight, then I think I'm right there. But if he didn't, then he can just fight after that. Assuming he doesn't get like butchered by Bernard Saint Denis, he could fight in Brazil. He fought there earlier in the year against Melzelo Quez Costa, and he won. But I think these two are pretty close to each other in the rankings. They're both just around a win or two outside the top 15. Um, and I think this would be a really good test to see, obviously, if Elvis Brenner is legit and or if Guram just had a bad night and was just off and he caught him with a good shot. Thiago Moises, proven guy. He's fought a lot of guys. He's fought Islam Makhachev. He's fought these kind of guys. He's fought Joel Alvarez, I believe. Um, so he's got a few fights in that sort of top 15 level. And Elvis Brenner, obviously, two fights only in the UFC, but coming off a win over Guram. So you want to double check, you want to make sure he's legit. And so I think this is a perfect fight to do so. But the next fight, Bruno Ferreira versus Bruno Silva. This one, there's no real reason to making this beside the fact that they're both named Bruno and they're both from Brazil. And they're both coming off losses in the first round. So this is a good one to see to try and rebounds them. Bruno Ferreira obviously got a big knockout win earlier in the year in Brazil against Gregory Rodriguez. Um, and Bruno Silva, he had a good win over Brad Tavares earlier in the year, but then he lost to Brendan Allen on that Jacksonville card. But I do think this would be a really good fight. I think almost guaranteed to end in a knockout. Both of these guys hit like a truck. And I think this one's guaranteed to go inside the distance and be a violent KO. So I think it would be really fun. I think Bruno Silva is the more technical striker, but we've seen in his recent fights, his chin is failing him. He was getting rocked by Brendan Allen. It was after that war with Alex Pereira where he really kind of went downhill and just didn't show the same level of toughness or durability. But Bruno Ferreira is not the most technically skilled guy. He's like a 5'10" middleweight, real short, stocky guy, but hits like a truck. So and he's coming off a loss to Sultan Ruzaboev, who's also going to feature on this card. But I think this is a really fun fight, guaranteed to end in a knockout, almost in my opinion. And again, two Brazilians, so they can't be upset regardless. But that's the main card done. I think that's a stacked main card. I think that would be absolute fireworks. But let's move on to the prelims. The order of this, by the way, is not completely set in stone. Like I've got the next fight. So we've got Joe Anderson Brito versus Jonathan Pierce as the headliner of the prelims. If you're gonna hear the rest of these fights on these prelims and be like any of these could headline the prelims, or maybe some of these could have been on the main card over certain fights. But I do think this is a good order for the main card. Good order for the main card. So I think, and a good order for the prelim. Sorry. So I think I've got this right, but obviously, any of these fights could be anywhere on the card really, because they're all just really good fights. But Joe Anderson Brito versus Jonathan Pierce. I think this would be a really fun fight. I think this would be like a sort of winner gets ranked at featherweight sort of fight as well. Maybe the winner takes that number 15 spot after maybe Alex Caceres loses to Giga Chikadze, and then the winner of this fight gets that number 15 ranking. Joe Anderson Brito in his last fight, he called out Dan Ige. He got a big KO win in the first round. Called out Dan Ige very aggressively. But Dan Ige's got a fight booked now against Bryce Mitchell. So um, no Dan Ige for you, Joe Anderson Brito. I don't know why you hate that guy so much, but you can get that after this. You win this fight, you can fight Dan Ige and you get your little wish. You can fucking beat up Dan Ige if you want. Um, but this would be a really good fight. Jonathan Pierce was booked to fight Bryce Mitchell back in May. He pulled out, and then Bryce Mitchell pulled out of his Evloev fight. And then Joe Anderson Brito's coming off a few big KO wins. I think this would be a fun fight, pretty evenly matched. I think it would be mainly contested on the feet, but we could see it go to the ground. And I think Joe Anderson Brito again. All winnable fights on these cards for Brazilian fighters. And I think this, like, he's a powerful guy, so I think he could definitely win this. Haven't seen a lot of Jonathan Pierce's fights, but he's a pretty solid fighter. But Jonas Brito's just got that sort of stocky, like muscular Brazilian power, which I'm not sure if Jonathan Pierce has. But he's still a solid fighter, so this would be a pretty close fight. But the next fight is one that's also already official. It's Caio Borralho versus Nursultan Ruziboev. There's a really good fight, and this is like a sort of middleweight prospects test. It's not often that they put two prospects up against each other, but this is one of the times that they have. So the winner of this one, I think, is legit. Like I think they're both legit. Obviously, Nursultan Ruziboev coming off a KO win in his debut against Bruno Ferreira. Caio Borralho is coming off a few really good wins. I think he just beat Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. I think that was his recent win, but he's got some other really good wins on his resume. So I think this is like a winner fights like a number 15 kind of guy. Like a winner of this fights like Chris Curtis or Anthony Hernandez, like the winner of that fight maybe, could be what you see next for the winner of this. But this is really just to see who is more legit. Like these guys are both legit. I think they are both have the potential to be ranked in the next few years. But this is kind of like a who's going to get ranked first sort of fight. But the next one, moving down the prelims, Gabriel Bonfim versus Phil Rowe. Um, I think this is a really good matchup to make. I think Gabriel Bonfim in his last fight looked really impressive. Got a guillotine submission in a minute and 13 seconds against Trevin Giles. And he called out Neil Magny post fight. Neil Magny is now booked to fight Ian Gary. I don't think you can give a guy a ranked opponent in his first like 2 or 3 fights in the UFC, but Phil Rowe is a guy that just fought Neil Magny and just almost won in a really boring fight. So I think this would be a perfect matchup to make. I think it's a really winnable fight for Gabriel Bonfim and somewhere where he could test the striking a little bit because Phil Rowe's not some powerful, dangerous striker. And also just make sure that that grappling is at the level that it needs to be before you enter the top 15 of the welterweight division. So I think this is a really good fight to make. And I'd back Gabriel Bonfim to win by submission. But moving down the card to the next Bonfim brother, we've got Ismail Bonfim. I've got put him against Christos Iagos. So obviously both Bonfim brothers fought back in Brazil in January. They both won. Since then, Gabriel won his next fight. Ismail unfortunately lost to Benoit Saint Denis. Um, he got kind of rushed a little bit. Just make sure, like it's with a kind of debuting guy, with a guy who's new in his UFC career. You really got to kind of watch how quickly that you rush them to the like outside the top 15. So I think Christos Giagos is a good, appropriate step back. A guy who's been around the UFC for a while. He's lost to Charles Oliveira. That's like a name that everyone would know on his resume. That he obviously did lose to, but um, He's coming off a win, a KO win over Ricky Glenn, who didn't look good in that fight, but I still think this is a solid matchup to make. I think there's a winnable fight for both guys. And just if Ismail can win, which I think he could, and I think he could win this fight probably by finish, just get him back on the winning streak, get him back feeling confident. Um, get him back like as a sort of prospect in people's eyes because everyone thought he was one of the best prospects in the division, and then he lost to Bernard Saint Denis, so that kind of hype got ruined a little bit. But maybe he can learn how to fucking check a body kick, or block a kick to the body. And if he can do that, let's just say probably wins this fight because Christos Yargos isn't very good. But is decent enough where I think this matchup would be close-ish and a winnable fight for Gabriel or so for Ismail Bonfim. But next fight on the card, Daniel Santos versus Daniel Marcos. Again, not much reason to make this fight other than the fact that they're both named Daniel and they're both from South America, obviously. Daniel Santos, Brazilian, everyone knows him, he's like mini Oliveira. And then Daniel Marcos is from Peru, I believe, and he's coming off two good wins, and one of them was actually in Brazil. He beat Simon Oliveira in Brazil. So I do think it's a good thing to get some of those guys back. Like on this card, if you just look at it so far, like Bruno Ferreira fought there in January. Gabriel Bonfim, Ismail Bonfim both fought there in January. Thiago Moises fought there in January. Um, Daniel Marcos fought there in January. So it's a good thing to get some of those guys back on that card that the Brazilian fans are familiar with seeing live. Even Daniel Marcos, who isn't Brazilian, he's Peruvian, so he'd still have some support down there, but probably against Daniel Santos, you'd imagine he wouldn't be the hometown favourite. But I think this is a really fun fight. These guys are both electric little pocket rocket strikers. Um, both have a good amount of power and both look just really slick and really fun to watch when they get those combinations going. So I think this will be a really fun fight in that bantamweight division. And also these two guys, both kind of prospects, both have dyed hair, um, both South American bantamweights, both like mostly strikers for the most part, and are just both really fun. Daniel Marcos obviously coming off a controversial decision in his last fight to Davy Grant, but in his first fight back in January, he did look really good. I think, and that was his debut as well, I believe. So can't be too hard on the guy. It was his second fight against Davy Grant where he won that close decision. But I think the winner of this fight, keep moving up, and then they're the one that's getting pushed forward as a prospect. So I think this would be a really fun fight to make. And I'd enjoy watching this a lot. The next one, also a fight that's already been made. It's Vitor Petrino versus Modestas Bukauskas. Um, this is pretty much like another step forward in the career of Vitor Petrino. He's coming off a good win over, I think it was Marcin Prachnio, at UFC 290, and he looked pretty good in that fight. Got a submission in the third round. Modestas Bukauskas is sort of on a little bit of a career rerun, sort of. He after he beats Tyson Pedro and Zach Pauga, but I think this is where the run sort of ends for him. This fight's already been made, so I don't need to talk about it too much. But I do predict Vitor Petrino to win this fight by finish. But the last two fights on the card, we've got some ladies on the card. Karine Silva versus Julia Stolyarenko. Um, I think this is a good fight to make. Karine Silva coming off a nasty submission win over Ketlin Souza in her last fight where she heel hooked, ankle locked her, and looked really impressive in that fight, got a quick sub. She's also got a fight booked against, I believe it's Maya Monroe's or something, on that UFC 292 card next week. I do predict her to win that fight by submission, and then she can turn around, fight on the Brazil card. I think this will be a good one. Both of them won their last fight by submission. And let's see if Julia Stolarenko is at all decent or if Molly McCann is just shit. So that's what we do with this fight. But the other one, Natalia Silva versus Lauren Murphy. This is meant to actually be. I went the wrong order. This is the second fight on the card. Um, Natalia Silva's also got a fight booked against Andrea Lee. I predict her to win that fight. And then she'll be ranked women's flyweight. So once she wins this, once you're ranked, you go up from there. And Lauren Murphy is someone who took a lot of damage in her last fight against Jessica Andrade back in Brazil. So again, get those people that have fought on the Brazil card. Lauren Murphy's not Brazilian; she's a crackhead. But anyway, I think this will be a good fight. Test Natalia Silva, get her moving up the rankings, and yeah. But that's the Brazil card that I've made, guys. Let me know what you think of it. I think that's a banging card. I think the UFC should fucking hire me as a matchmaker, to be honest, because I'm just building cards for them. But that's the card. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.